Tony D and Little Joan somewhere in the background, and this is well, it's kind of a screenwriter's take. It's sort of a hot take on the recent assassination of the United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson. So we're going to talk about that. Smash like and subscribe. Thank you for smash liking and subscribing. Check out my books. The links are in the description. Comedy horror in South Jersey. It's the Pineys, books 1 through 16, available at Amazon.com. Don't forget, Kindle Unlimited is free. Now, you might say, what qualifications do you have to be commenting on this? Well, prior to the Pineys, I wrote books on organized crime. So I wrote Complete Mafia for D20, Complete Mafia West Coast, and yes, they are game books, but they contained a tremendous amount of research into organized crime and how it works. There's also a chapter on the Mafia, which doesn't exist in FU I'm Italian, and I have other projects that are Mafia related. So there is quite a bit of research. I don't actually know any Mafia guys, just to be upfront about it. Have I met any? I don't know. I don't think so. I wouldn't want to, no offense, no disrespect, just because I know how dangerous they are. And they are dangerous people. Make no mistake. Everybody in organized crime is a danger. But I see a lot of people online looking at this video and saying, oh, I'm a professional hitman, which I find incredibly weird. Because the number one thing I learned about organized crime is it's not like the movies. There is really not a thing, not really like a professional hitman. Not really. The only time you might have a guy who is quote unquote a professional hitman is in criminal organizations that are so large, there's enough guys in it for specialization. And you might get a guy who is an enforcer, type of enforcer, who does a lot of hits for the family. But that's all incredibly dangerous for a lot of reasons. The, and you have to understand that every soldier in the organized crime family is a killer. It's usually part of the reason you got made in the first place, because you actually killed someone. It's very rare to have a made guy who hasn't killed anyone, or at least participated in some kind of covering up of somebody else shooting somebody. I mean, it's possible you may not have shot anybody yourself and killed them, but it's pretty unlikely you haven't been involved in some way. And the reason for that is similar to the reasons where people speculate about, Epstein Island and stuff. If a political figure's been to Epstein Island, they've got him, right? They've got him on tape. They have blackmail material. It's a similar thing in an organized crime family. If you've killed someone, they know they can count on your silence for the rest of the crimes in the family. So it's very rare that an organized crime figure will retire, but a guy who's up to his eyeballs in all the shenanigans of the family, if he is allowed to retire, the family can pretty much rely on his silence because he's committed so many crimes in the past that he's tied into murders and assaults and other robberies and whatnot. Not that they use it for blackmail, although you might get leaned on, but leaning on a made guy is incredibly dangerous. But it's unlikely. It's more like, well, you're in the club because you killed a guy. In fact, if you look at the junior black mafia that operated in Camden, their initiation was you had to kill a guy, a random guy in Camden, just anywhere. And that's why the murder rate in Camden in those years spiked way up in the air. So when they talk about professional, a lot of times they're comparing it to military guys. Now, military guys aren't hitmen. But yes, organized crime figures do like to recruit veterans because veterans are experienced with weapons. They tend to be healthy. They can fight. These are all positives in the criminal underworld. If you can handle yourself very, very well, then you're of use to the family. However, it's still insanely dangerous to take on a hit. And here's why. The first reason is you are the guy who's committed a very high profile crime, even though you may have been paid decently for it, although I don't think you could pay a guy enough to commit a hit like this. But let's say it's an appealing amount of money to you. Let's say, I don't know, $250,000 or something. I could choose to pay you and hope you shut up about the assassination, or I could save myself $250,000 and just have you killed, and that really makes you quiet. So the only guys in the even in the world of organized crime, yeah, they might commit a hit for the family, but if it's super high profile, they understand that their lives are in danger too. So typically, you do want to farm this out to someone who will commit the crime because they're disposable. Somebody who's capable, he has to be capable enough to do it, but he has to be disposable enough that you can murder him later. Now, there was guys on some podcast, I forget which one, they were saying the ideal situation is a crackhead. You promise the crackhead money and give him a gun and send him on his way, and then, after he commits the crime, you give him some money and some crack, and then he ODs. Sure, that's an ideal situation if it goes off that way, but crackheads are notoriously unreliable. Yeah, he might commit the hit. He also might sell the gun for more crack. And then you got a problem. You also have a problem with a crack guy. I mean, crack guys are incredibly, any drug addict is going to be incredibly unreliable. He might go right to the cops and say, oh, give me some crack and I'll tell you who hired me to kill this guy. So that seems to be the least likely scenario. A guy who is capable enough and is ideologically motivated might be a good person to recruit for the criminal underworld, because you can pretend to be part of that ideology, front him the money and the training and the time to do it, and then be his lifeline, so to speak, when something like this happens, and then make sure he gets away. In other words, you promise him, oh yeah, we're gonna smuggle you out to Cancun. Just get in this boat. And then you take him out in the boat, and somehow he doesn't end up in Cancun. He ends up at the bottom of the ocean. So it's high profile, high risk, low reward. Because anybody that would hire you for a hit has to rely that you're going to take your money and then go off and retire or do another hit or whatever. There's no way, there's only one way to make sure you're never going to talk about this murder, and that's to make sure you're at the bottom of the ocean or at the bottom of a ditch somewhere. So that's why there are really no professional hitmans. Any made guy knows that risk. He's constantly calculating those sorts of risks all day long. He doesn't want to commit those hits unless he absolutely has to. A high profile hit? No. He's going to recruit somebody, one of his associates, who thinks he's going to get made, and then maybe he's just capable enough, and you through intermediaries, maybe you manipulate him into doing the hit. Something like this. And keep in mind, this is a civilian too, and organized crime guys tend to shy away from murders like this because they become incredibly high profile. You can't just do this and expect it not to be on the news. This is crazy. This was like broad daylight in Manhattan, and he's the CEO of United Healthcare. So, and yes, again, I mean, they do recruit military veterans, but understand that the more capable the military veteran is, the more likely he's not going to be able to be recruited. He just won't be. You have to have a desperate military veteran. And the more desperate desperate he is, it's likely he's less capable. If he's a drug addict, also less capable. It's more of a risk that way. So, yeah, I don't think that guy's a drug addict. I think that would be an insane way to go about this hit. Uh, so, the other thing is, it's now come out that he left messages on the bullet casings. Now, you might say, aha, that is definitely a guy looking for revenge. And that is evidence that, yeah, this is a very personal hit. It's a guy who read this book. There, apparently, the messages on the bullet casings are from a book. That's true, unless this is by design. And by design, again, you might find an ideologically driven individual to commit the hit for you with the intention of killing him. Or you hire the hitman, and then the hitman commits the hit knowing that he's also going to kill a guy who has that ideology, and make it look like a suicide and tie it all to him. So this guy sort of vaguely resembles Jake Gyllenhaal. So you would have to find a guy, you would have to have sort of a perfect storm of fake evidence, right? You'd have to find a guy who sort of looks like that, know where he lives, know where he's going to be, do the hit, get to his house, kill him, plant the evidence, make it look like a suicide, and then, leave a bunch of other evidence that it never comes back to you, but it all points to him. So the cops go there and they say, "Oh, this is a closed case. We now know who the murderer is." And for some reason, he murdered himself, even though he got a big reward. Or you take the reward, so there was no reward. The only reward was that, yeah, he wanted to get revenge. So, all that being said, what do I think this is? Well, I mean, you look at the professional level of it, and Jack Posobiec saying, "Oh, it's stupid that he's a professional." The guy had enough thought to have a long-barreled gun with some sort of suppressor on it. He did hide himself relatively well. Now in the city, again, it's like impossible to hide yourself. So he may just be an amateur who didn't sufficiently hide himself, or he may be playing a game in which, he pretended to hide himself for some of it, and then he's going to expose himself later, knowing that the cops will be on to him, and then frame another guy who sort of looks like him by, again, making it look like a suicide and leaving the evidence. That would truly be Machiavellian. Or he may just be arrogant enough to think, well, once I get out of the city, who cares if they know what I look like? I'm going to flee to Mexico and never come back again. Maybe that's the case. Or maybe he's so underground and off the grid to begin with, he doesn't think he can be caught. The bottom line is, and again, I wrote a screenplay that was about a guy committing a crime in New York. There are cameras everywhere these days. So you have to get out of the radius of the cameras long enough to disappear, right? So you'd have to, for instance, get out of New York City, get to a place where there were no cameras, go into that place, change your clothes, and look enough so when you exited that place from a different area, anyone seeing you wouldn't connect it to. And then, your last known location would be, for instance, the woods. That is what I used in the screenplay. He takes a train out to a wooded area, walks into the woods, knows that he's not being seen, goes into the bushes, changes all his clothes, exits at a different spot, throws away all the clothes that he was wearing for the crime, and then goes about his day. That's the only way to do it to even have a chance. Even then, you run the risk that someone sees you, they find the clothes that you changed out of near the area, and then are somehow able to pick up your trail then. any connection to a license plate, your cell phone. I mean, that's a big one too. They can track people using cell phones, and if they want you bad enough, they found pictures of this guy. I don't know if they have it here in Starbucks. I mean, this is the hit. But they found pictures of him of him. Now they don't have it on this one. They have him pictures. They have pictures of him in Starbucks without his mask off, and you could see what his face looks like. So they're probably going to catch him, or they're going to find him dead, or they're never going to find him. Meaning that he's dead, but like he's at the bottom of the ocean, he's at the bottom of some cement thing, and because the guys that hired him or set him up said, go ahead, do this murder, and then come back to us and we'll smuggle you out of the country. And then when he got there, they just killed him and put him in an oil drum and buried him in the middle of a field somewhere, and you're never going to find him. That would be the real way to do a hit. The hitmen, quote unquote, are disposable unless they're made guys. But again, made guys stay away from this stuff because they know how much trouble it causes them. A truly made guy who does a hit for the family, they can't go to the cops, unless they're going to leave the family, and that's dangerous. So if they've committed a hit and that unravels and the cops find you, you're just expected to go to jail, probably for the rest of your life. So, so it's a huge risk. So likely this guy is either a cutout, and keep in mind too, this could be some kind of weird false flag run by the feds. Maybe they didn't like the CEO, Brian Thompson, for some reason. Apparently there's rumors that he may have been doing some kind of illegal trading, I think. I'm not sure if I read that correctly, but imagine that tied into some politician. And maybe the feds decided, we'll get rid of this guy. They would be the most equipped to actually do it. Because, as we all know, the feds seem to have ties and seem to be monitoring every whack job on the internet. They just need to turn him up, get him a gun, maybe give him some intel, and, again, through cutouts. They would do it through so many cutouts that there'd be no way to trace it back to them. So they'd probably have the feds talk to a guy who wasn't in organized crime but was associated, a real scuzzball, and he would be the cutout used to hire this guy, because you want at least two buffers, right? You have to have a guy in between you and the guy who actually committed the crime. Because if they find this guy alive, well, guess what? The guy who hired him, he's going to be very, very dead very, very soon. Because that's your insulation to make sure it never comes back to you. But, the guy to make sure is dead, and the guy who hired him would have all sorts of incentives to make sure that happened, would be the guy who hired him. Once the hitman's dead, you can keep his money, you don't have to worry about anybody, and you can go on about your business. So it's a complicated thing if it's that. If it is a lone wolf kind of scenario that a guy, maybe his grandmother died because the healthcare industry ignored her pleas for help with her cancer, and then he decided, well, I'm going to take care of this dude. Or, some are suggesting like an Antifa scenario, some left-wingers who are upset with the healthcare industry. I mean, that's possible. It could be they did their research, spent a couple weekends training with a gun and figuring out how it worked and firing it a bunch of times. One of the guys at that same podcast did have something interesting to say about the suppressor, and that the suppressor and a 22 would tend to jam. And he looked like he was prepared to clear the jam, because he fired it and immediately he was racking the gun back and ready to unjam it for a second shot. But he seemed awfully, other than walking up to the guy and putting it in the back of his head, yeah, that would have been the sign of a career criminal. I wouldn't call them professional hits. I would say career criminal. But then again, keep in mind, every career criminal is probably a killer, or at least capable of it. So it's just weird to me. Everybody's online like, oh, these guys aren't. He's not a professional. I'm like, well, it depends on whether or not he was paid. That's really only the distinction between a professional killer and just a murderer, is whether or not he got paid. If he got paid, he's a hitman. If he didn't get paid, which seems more and more likely, he is just some ideologue or someone seeking revenge for personal reasons. But either way, it's shocking to me. It's shocking, and it's another reason why if you look at it this way, gun control in New York, right? The idea is, well, there's no guns in New York, so everybody's safe. Yeah, that doesn't really work, does it, right? So imagine if you had a different scenario in which you had a Manhattan that had open carry laws, and everybody had a gun. Like most people on the streets of Manhattan would, or at least every other person would have a gun. This would be 1,000 times more dangerous, right? So this guy's creeping up behind a guy with a gun. Chances are, Manhattan's so crowded, another guy with a gun could see that and pull out his gun and say, hey, stop. Or maybe take him out. Take him out right there. It would all be on the security camera, and people would know that. The CEO himself would have been armed, possibly. I mean, he was receiving death threats. I mean, if I was receiving death threats, I definitely would want to be armed or have bodyguards. They say he ignored the threats to some degree and didn't get bodyguards, but I'm not sure what bodyguards would have done. It would have, hopefully armed bodyguards would have done something. I mean, they would have been at least in the way and capable of drawing their weapons and confronting this guy. But the other thing the guys on the podcast said was a professional would have walked up right behind him and put the bullet right in his head, which is true. I think that much would have indicated a stone cold killer, a career criminal who knew what he was doing and probably had done it before. So yeah, I mean, this guy probably doesn't have a tremendous amount of experience, but it's very possible he's already in the ground. Anyhow, that's my thoughts on this terrible, terrible incident. It's pretty crazy. I mean, it's another reason not to go to the big city. Anyhow, that's it for me, Tony D and Little Joan. Check us out on the black site, the orange site, and the green site for more videos. We'll see you in the next one.